Tuesday, 64-year-old Victor Tony Jones was executed by the state of Florida. He is the 13th inmate to die by lethal injection this year. It took 11 minutes. He had no final words for the victim's family.
As the clock ticked down to 6:13 p.m. on September 30th, 2025, Victor Tony Jones prepared to face the consequence of a crime committed 35 years earlier. For more than 3 decades, he had awaited this moment, the execution that would bring a long legal battle to a close. But how did a man whose early life was filled with hardship end up on death row? Victor's story did not begin with violence. It started with neglect and hardship. Born in 1961, he was abandoned by his mother at a young age, and the sense of stability and love that every child needs was never there for him. Raised by relatives, he never truly found a place to belong. But it was his time at the Florida School for Boys, a reform school with a notorious reputation, that would shape the course of his life in ways no one could have predicted. There, in that harsh and unforgiving environment, Victor's childhood was marred by abuse. The physical and emotional trauma he endured left deep scars that would affect him for the rest of his life. These early years, filled with pain and mistreatment, would define the choices he made later. As an adult, Victor moved to Miami and found work at a small engineering company owned by Jacob and Matilda Nestor, an elderly couple known for offering employment to people in difficult circumstances. They welcomed him into their lives, offering him a chance at stability. But Victor had other plans that would change everything for them.
Jacob and Matilda Nestor's kindness, their willingness to help someone in need, would unknowingly set the stage for a tragic event. On the night of December 19, 1990, Victor's intentions turned dark, leading to a shocking crime that would shatter their lives and set off a chain of events that would stretch over 3 decades. What happened that night remained a mystery for many years. What led Victor to commit such a violent act against a couple who had shown him nothing but kindness? The answers were buried in the past, only revealed much later through the investigation and trial that followed. As the hours ticked closer to his execution, one thing was certain. Victor Tony Jones was about to face the consequences of a life shaped by choices made long before that fateful night. As Victor Tony Jones faces the final moments of his life, you have the chance to witness a story that will make you question justice itself. But here's the thing. If you've stayed this long, you owe it to yourself to be part of the conversation. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know. If you're not going to comment, please tell us why. It takes just a second and your voice matters. And if you want to see more gripping true crime stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. The truth awaits. On December 19, 1990, a violent act left an elderly couple in Miami brutally taken from their lives. Jacob and Matilda Nestor, both in their late 60s, were known for their generosity. They ran a small engineering firm and had recently hired Victor Tony Jones, a man in his late 20s who seemed like another person in need.
Victor had only been employed by the Nestors for a day, but what seemed like an ordinary day quickly escalated. Victor had spent time observing the couple, learning their routines, and soon his intentions darkened. That evening, a quiet moment in the office turned into a tragedy. Jacob and Matilda had no reason to suspect that someone they had hired to help would betray them so suddenly. By the end of the night, their lives would be forever altered. What led Victor to commit such a crime? Why target 2 people who had offered him nothing but kindness? The investigation into the crime would soon begin, but the answers to these questions would take years to uncover. What seemed like a robbery was much more than that. What would follow would unravel an unimaginable story. Jacob and Matilda Nestor led a quiet and modest life in Miami, grounded in values of kindness and community. Jacob, 67, a World War II veteran, had spent much of his life not just working, but giving back to those around him. Matilda, 66, his wife, shared his dedication to helping others. Together, they ran a small but respected engineering firm. It wasn't large, but it was a business built on the idea that hard work and generosity could make a difference in people's lives. The Nestors had a reputation for offering work to those struggling to make ends meet. They believed that everyone deserved a chance, and they opened their doors to people in need, offering a steady job without asking too many questions. It was not only their business, but their way of life, helping those who had fallen on hard times no matter the reason.
They treated everyone who worked for them as part of the family. Jacob and Matilda had 2 children, but their concept of family went beyond bloodlines. They welcomed others into their lives, showing respect and warmth to those around them. Victor Tony Jones, hired by the Nestors in December 1990, was another person they hoped to help. A man down on his luck, he was welcomed into their lives as they had done for so many before him. They never suspected that their act of kindness would have tragic consequences. The death of Jacob and Matilda Nestor wasn't just the loss of 2 innocent lives. It was the loss of everything they had built together, a foundation of trust, compassion, and community. Their deaths left an indelible mark on everyone who knew them, shattering the belief that kindness would always be repaid. The tragedy was more than a senseless crime. It was the destruction of something deeply human and good. Victor Tony Jones was born in 1961 into a life shaped by instability and hardship. From a young age, he faced an overwhelming sense of neglect. Abandoned by his mother, Victor was raised by relatives, but his early years lacked the stability and love that most children need to grow into emotionally secure adults. This early environment set the stage for a troubled future. Victor's life took a difficult turn when he was sent to the Florida School for Boys, a reform school known for its harsh conditions. Intended to rehabilitate young offenders, it became a place of trauma for many. Victor, like many others, faced an environment of neglect and abuse. While the school was meant to correct behavior, it only deepened his sense of mistrust and isolation. The experience left a mark on Victor that would remain throughout his life.
After leaving the reform school, Victor struggled to find his place in society. He lacked a stable foundation, and the scars from his time at the institution affected his ability to form meaningful relationships. His troubled past began to define his decisions, shaping his outlook on the world and how he interacted with others. When Victor found himself in Miami, he was hired by Jacob and Matilda Nestor, a couple known for offering help to those who needed a second chance. It seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start, but for Victor, he was merely another chapter in a life marked by deep emotional scars and a history of difficult decisions. Victor's past was a burden he carried into every new opportunity, and it would eventually lead to a fateful night that would change the lives of the Nestors forever. December 19, 1990, started as an ordinary day at Jacob and Matilda Nestor's engineering firm. The couple, in their late 60s, had built their business on the foundation of trust and hard work. They had hired many employees over the years, offering jobs to those who needed them most. Victor Tony Jones, a man they had only just met, was one of those individuals. He had been working there for a day, blending into their everyday routine. The Nestors went about their work, unaware that this day would mark a tragic turning point. Victor, who seemed like any other employee, had spent enough time observing their movements and habits. As the evening approached, the couple had no reason to suspect anything was amiss.
But Victor had already decided. In a moment of opportunity, he took action. Matilda stepped away from the main area, heading to the back of the building. In that instant, Victor made his move. He attacked the couple who had welcomed him into their business with kindness, no questions asked. In those final moments, there was no time for hesitation. The trust that had been extended to him, a simple act of hiring someone in need, was now shattered. Victor's actions that night were quick, and the consequences irreversible. The once peaceful office had turned into a scene of disbelief. Jacob and Matilda's lives were forever altered in the span of a few moments. The couple, who had spent their lives giving to others, found themselves on the receiving end of betrayal. Their death would soon raise questions. What drove Victor to such lengths? And why did he act so swiftly against the people who had shown him nothing but kindness? The investigation into the deaths of Jacob and Matilda Nestor began immediately after the crime. When police arrived at the scene, they were faced with a puzzle that didn't quite add up. The office, once a hub of productivity and kindness, was now a place of suspicion and unanswered questions. At first, the crime appeared to be a robbery. Several items had been taken, but the couple's wallets, jewelry, and other valuables were left untouched. This made investigators suspicious. Robberies typically result in stolen goods, but in this case, something felt off. It wasn't just about the items missing, it was about the nature of the crime.
Victor Tony Jones, the Nestor's new employee, was quickly identified as a person of interest. He had been the last person to see the couple alive, and his whereabouts after the crime were unclear. The investigation focused on him, and it didn't take long for the pieces to start falling into place. A significant breakthrough came when Victor was found at a nearby hospital seeking treatment for a gunshot wound. It turned out that Victor had been injured during the crime. Jacob Nestor, in a desperate attempt to defend himself, had shot him. Despite this injury, Victor had managed to escape the scene. When questioned, Victor denied any involvement, but the police were already connecting the dots. Eventually, he admitted to the crime. His confession came after prolonged questioning, during which he revealed that he had planned the robbery. However, things had spiraled out of control. Forensic evidence confirmed Victor's role in the crime. His fingerprints were found on items in the office, and his admission of guilt was backed by the physical evidence left at the scene. It became clear that Victor had methodically planned the crime, but his desperation and the unexpected confrontation had led to a tragic outcome. The investigation revealed more than just the physical evidence. It exposed the true extent of Victor's actions. The man who had been hired to work alongside the Nestors had instead turned on them, driven by his own motives. But the question lingered. What had truly driven Victor to take such drastic action against those who had shown him nothing but kindness?
Victor Tony Jones's trial began in February 1993, just months after the tragic deaths of Jacob and Matilda Nestor. The case quickly attracted public attention, not just for the crime itself, but for the moral questions it raised, particularly regarding the death penalty. As the courtroom proceedings unfolded, both the prosecution and defense made their case, with strong emotions on display from all sides. The prosecution built its case around the brutality of the crime, emphasizing the betrayal Victor had shown toward the couple. They painted a picture of a man who had been given an opportunity by Jacob and Matilda, yet repaid them with violence. The prosecution focused on the cold, calculated nature of the crime,
pointing out that the robbery was not simply an act of desperation, but rather a deliberate decision. In contrast, the defense sought to present Victor as a man shaped by his difficult past. They argued that Victor's early years, marked by abuse and neglect, had a lasting impact on his ability to make sound decisions. They asked the jury to consider his troubled upbringing and the environment he grew up in, suggesting that these factors had influenced his actions on the night of the crime. As the trial progressed, the emotional weight of the case became evident. The defense's portrayal of Victor as a product of his circumstances was met with mixed reactions, while the prosecution's portrayal of the Nestors as generous, innocent victims resonated with many. The jury deliberated and, in the end, recommended the death penalty. When the sentence was handed down, it marked the conclusion of the trial, but began a long process of appeals. For the Nestors family, the trial offered little closure. The decision to seek the death penalty was a contentious one, and the case sparked conversations about justice, fairness, and the moral implications of capital punishment. Victor's fate was sealed, but the questions lingered. Was he a victim of his past, or was he simply a man who made a terrible choice? On September 30th, 2025, Victor Tony Jones's life reached its final moment after over 3 decades of legal battles and appeals. His death sentence, which had been handed down in 1993, was carried out by the state of Florida, marking the end of a long process. Victor's final hours were spent in relative quiet, reflecting on the actions that had led him to this point. His last meal, requested at 4 p.m., consisted of fried chicken, collard greens, and sweet tea. Nothing unusual, nothing symbolic. The meal was simple, but the finality of the moment was clear. There were no final words from Victor, just a silent acceptance of what was to come. As the clock ticked closer to 6:13 p.m., the designated time of execution, Victor's legal team made a last attempt to delay the process, citing claims about his mental capacity. However, these last-minute appeals were rejected, and the procedure went forward. At 6:13 p.m., Victor was led to the execution chamber at Florida State Prison in Stark. The room was somber, and the process was methodical. As the lethal injection began, Victor showed no defiance, no resistance. There was a quiet acknowledgement of the finality of the sentence. With his death, the case came to an end, though for many, the emotional impact of his actions and the long legal battle would continue. The family members, those most affected by the events that led to his execution, were left with a complex mix of closure and lingering sorrow. The decades-long fight for justice had concluded, but the emotional scars remained.
The emotional impact of the crime committed by Victor Tony Jones was profound, especially for Irene Fizer, the Nestor's daughter. For years, she carried the weight of her parents' deaths, and the long road to justice had taken its toll. With Victor's execution finally carried out in 2025, Irene was forced to confront a complex mix of emotions: relief, sorrow, and a sense of unfinished business. After all the legal battles and the years of delay, Irene had mixed feelings as she prepared for the final chapter of this painful story. The quest for justice had been exhausting, and while the execution marked an official end to the legal process, the emotional cost for Irene was impossible to measure. Her parents had been taken from her without warning, and no legal sentence could bring them back. Irene's journey through grief had been a long one.
For years, she struggled with anger and pain, trying to reconcile the deep loss she felt with the idea of forgiveness. The idea of forgiveness was a powerful one, but it was not simple. Could she ever forgive someone who took everything from her? Or was forgiveness even possible after so much harm? These were the questions she had to face as the execution date loomed. When the execution finally occurred, Irene was there, present for a moment that many saw as closure. However, for her, the emotional scars remained. Victor's death did not restore her parents. It did not undo the pain of their absence. What it left her with was the realization that closure is not always clean or easily found. The case had come to an official end, but the weight of loss, guilt, and the question of forgiveness would linger long after.
Victor Tony Jones' execution ended a long saga, but it raised questions about justice, punishment, and the nature of forgiveness. Was it justice served, or was there more to Victor's story that we'll never truly understand? Leave your thoughts below. What do you think? Could you ever find it in your heart to forgive someone who took everything from you? How would you cope with such profound loss and betrayal? We want to hear your thoughts. Share them with us in the comments below. Your perspective is important, and this case raises powerful questions about justice, forgiveness, and the complexity of human emotions. If you want to dive deeper into more gripping true crime stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Join us as we explore these real-life cases that challenge our beliefs and keep us questioning what we would do in the face of unimaginable circumstances. Stay tuned and be part of the conversation.